Okay, so in this video we're going to talk a little bit about pseudocode. And first thing I should probably start off with here is that when we talk about pseudocode, we're talking about exactly that, pseudocode. We're not, the title of the topic is not code; it's pseudocode, right? So the idea is that, right, we're not writing any specific code. We're not writing Fortran or C++ or Java or whatever. There's lots of languages out there that you can code. The idea is that when we talk about algorithms, which we won't get into a ton in this class, but the idea is that we have some kind of more generic language, which is referred to as pseudocode, right? So when we write these algorithms or procedures, we don't want them to be language specific, right? The idea being that if I had some problem I wanted to solve, I could write an algorithm or write some pseudocode, and I could hand it over to a programmer, and that programmer could put it into any language that he or she wanted to, right? So the idea is that this is not code specific, right? It's more generic. However, of course, the structures that we're going to look at are so basic that they're going to look a lot like what you see in your specific code. So just something to keep in mind as we go through here. And of course, if you have experience with specific code, which I'm sure a lot of you out there do, you probably have more experience than I do. I just know the basics of specific code like C++, Fortran, and things like that. If you have experience there, the pseudocode is going to be extremely easy for you, but you don't have to know anything about any specific programming language to be able to pick up on the pseudocode. So the first, I guess this is just an example. The first example here is an example of an if statement, and so the idea of an if statement is, when you look at code, you start just reading line by line. You go sequentially from top to bottom. And so the idea of an if statement is that if this condition is true, if that condition is true, then you execute this statement. If that condition is not true, then you go to the else portion and you execute this statement. Right? That's the idea of an if then or an if else. I guess it's not usually called if then. That's the idea of an if statement or an if else statement. And one other thing I should point out, this, I think we all have an idea of what that symbol means in mathematics. In programming language, it has a little bit different meaning. If we write x equals 2, what that means is that this is really called the assignment operator. So it's a very similar idea to what you are used to in your algebra classes, but the idea is that the computer has some storage for this variable, right? And if you write x equals 2, it's taking and storing that number in place of x. It's assigning a value of 2 to this variable, right? So so there has to be a different symbol for what we're used to for equals in mathematics and the assignment. And different books and different instructors use different symbols. You'll notice I've used the colon equals. Right? That means y is assigned the value of x. Right? So if I wanted to write an equation, right, say I wanted to write 2x equals, 4x minus 3, something like that, I would not want to use the assignment operator, right? I wouldn't want to express in my language that 2x is getting assigned this value. I just want to write that as a mathematical equation, so we just use the regular old equals. Some programming languages use like a double equals versus a single equals, right? So the double equals is a mathematical equation versus an assignment. So for this video, we'll go with, if it's just an equals, that's an equals like you're used to. If it's an assignment, we'll use the colon equals. And you can see that I've got that written over here. So let's take this if statement and we're gonna trace through it. Right? We're just gonna follow through with these values. We're gonna follow through with these values. And so we want to determine what values our variables all contain when we get, right, we come through and we just read line by line what happens when we're finished. So let's see if we can follow through. I'm on black. So right now I guess I probably should have used this symbol, right? We're starting with these assigned values. We're going to start with these. We're going to start with these, and so right now I've got that y is 10 and x is 5, right? So I would not, since that y less than x is not true, I do not evaluate this statement. I skip and I go to the else, which is this statement. So I'm going to say that z gets now assigned the value of x, which is 5. Right, so this is overwritten. That's overwritten. Now z has a value of 5. And then this line down here, right, I have my if and my else. This line is not a part of the if statement. It's just a line sitting by itself. So we go ahead and we execute that, and a, right, so a is some new variable we didn't start with. A gets assigned the value of z, which is now 5. Right, so at the very end, we would still have that x has the value 5, y has the value 10, z has a new value 5, and a has the value of z, which is 5. So when everything was all said and done, these are the assignments that we ended with. Hopefully that kind of gives you the idea of what the assignment operator is doing, and also of what an if statement does. Okay, so let's move on and look at a second example here. This is an example of a loop, an example of what we call a for loop. And so we do the same thing. We start at the top, work our way down. Now the idea of what's going to happen in a for loop is, you see here, for. That's why it's called a for loop. F-O-R, not the number 4. What's going to happen is we're going to keep executing these statements which are inside of the for loop. Right? I know that they're inside of the for loop because they're indented. Right? Anything that lines up, if there was another statement down here that lined up with my for loop, then I would know that was outside of the for loop. And sometimes you'll see braces like this, just to make it clear that the statements inside the braces are what are inside of the for loop. Right, so anything outside of the braces here would not be a part of the for loop. Right, so the idea of how the for loop works is we're going to keep executing to the bottom of these statements, and then we're going to go back to the top, and then we're going to execute down to the bottom, and then go back to the top, and we're going to do that. We're going to do that according to these numbers. So we're going to start with I equals 2, and we're going to keep iterating until I gets to n. Okay, so we have to, when we trace through this by hand, we'll have to figure out what I is equal to and what n is equal to and all that stuff. So what these lines of code do is they find the maximum of a list of numbers. And you can see over here I wrote down a list of numbers. And you can see this first line of code, it's gonna, oops, I should have used colon equals here, I apologize, colon equals. So it's going to assign, it assigns this variable large to the first number of the list. So the idea is this: when you have your list of numbers, here's your first, second, third, fourth. So when I trace through this, I want to keep track of the different variables that are in my pseudocode. And in this case, there's going to be two things changing: the variable large and the variable I, which starts at 2. Okay, so we can see, I'm kind of marking this up a little bit, but this little subscript is I, right? So my I's are these values, 1, 2, 3, 4. And right, so in this list, right, if I just was examining this list by inspection, I'd look through all 4 numbers and I can just tell which one is the largest, right? But so I've got to tell, when I'm writing this as a program for a computer, I've got to tell the computer when to stop looking, and it's going to stop looking when I gets to 4. Right? So in my code, n is going to be the I value where we stop. Right? So in other words, I'm going to do this loop starting when I equals 2 and ending when I equals 4. There's only 4 in my list. Right, so that's kind of an introduction to how the for loop works. Of course, we'll go through and we'll do this. And what I'm going to do is just trace through each iteration of the loop in my table, tracking the variables. I think I will stop this video here, and we'll pick that up in the next video.